give it just a second to buffer in. Then I'll get the links and share it to you.
Perfect.
And your channel. Also, if you see me constantly, like I feel like people who watch are constantly like, man, you touch your face so much, but like my glasses, the nose piece broke out.
Oh no.
And nothing is open, and if I take my glasses off, I'm legally blind, so I can't see to put the nose piece, like the screw,
Oh
into my nose
no.
piece. So it's that's why I'm constantly doing this, is because I'm trying to adjust it off of my face, like in that painful,
Yeah.
painful place. All right, so yes,
Yeah.
all right, we are live now. I'm not sure how much of that you guys caught, but that's an interesting little. So much, but like, oh, let's mute that. But yeah, so I am here, and I'm really happy about this. I'm not trying to overplay that and make you feel special. I genuinely love your content, and I think you're a fantastic person in the language learning community. But I'm here with Michael from Polyglot Files, and I appreciate you from joining, or for joining. I'm sure anybody, you're a much larger channel than I am in terms of language learning, so I'm not sure if you need to do a self-introduction or not. If you would like to, you can, or we can just kind of jump into it. That is up to you.
I could do a quick one.
Okay.
I guess for anybody who doesn't know. My name is Michael. I run a channel website called the Polyglot Files, and it's mostly just focused on language learning, linguistics, and polyglottery.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. One of the things I love about your channel is I love that you will document some of your stuff. I love your, like, you've documented some of your studies and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, I was trying to think of where I found your channel. I try to do that with anybody who I have come on, and the only thing I can think of right off in terms of like one of the first videos I remember seeing from you is when you did a how you studied Russian.
Oh yeah.
And so I know that you do some of that stuff. But what I really love too is you have this kind of you have this feel too of what is that channel called? Ling. What is that channel called that Paul runs? That Paul guy that
Oh,
was
Lang focus.
Lang Focus. You have some. You
Yeah.
have videos that are very well made and very well researched. And I love that stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah. I try to, I guess, toe a line between what I am interested in doing in terms of, language learning and what that looks like in my day-to-day life and how that impacts who I am as a person, but also like my educational background is in linguistics. Like I don't have a master's degree or like I'm not researching in the field, but like all of my undergrad was in linguistics, and I like part of my love for languages comes from wanting to understand that like deeper scientific background, I guess,
Sure.
to what they are. That doesn't mean necessarily though that I'm not an expert. That's kind
No,
of
for
something
sure.
I try and tote.
Did you before you got into taking linguistics, were you learning, like, you were learning languages before that?
Yeah, so in Canada, as a kid, you have to learn French, and that was kind of. I actually hated French. I've talked about this a lot on my channel. And then I kind of got to high school, and people were like, what do you want to do with your life? Where are you going? And I didn't really have a plan, so I kind of just stuck with what I was good at. And after a while, I kind of said, I kind of like French. And then I got to university, and they were like, well, what do you want to study? And I kind of said, I'm interested in Italian because I'm Italian. I'm interested in German because it just looks like something that could be really cool. And then it
Yeah.
kind of just blossomed from there. And I took linguistics as my major and kind of minored in the rest of the languages, French
Okay.
and Italian.
Yeah. Do you find that that your experience in linguistics has helped you learn languages better, or maybe just have a better understanding in terms of getting kind of your foot in the door with a language, or how do you feel that that's affected it at all?
Yeah, I think it's helpful. I think that, I don't want to tell anybody how to learn a language. That's not really my place. But I
Sure.
think having a background in linguistics is definitely helpful for understanding language structures that are not part of your native language. So like when I was learning Japanese for that like hot minute, it wasn't even really a full thing. It was just kind of a dabble. Having an understanding of case markings, having an understanding of word order was definitely useful. And I'm not saying you need a linguistics degree to do that, but even a quick skim of a Wikipedia page about syntax could give you
Sure.
enough of an understanding to apply to whatever language it is that you want to learn.
Yeah, I have a deep appreciation for linguistics because obviously I love languages and I would love to understand them on a like deeper, more meaningful level. But I worked with a girl who took linguistics, and she gave me one of her textbooks, and I read the first page, and I was like, I don't understand what any of this information means. Like, it's a very dense subject.
Yeah. Well, I think it falls sometimes too into the trap of like, before you can learn about the subject matter, they want you to learn all the lingo. So like every single linguistics textbook I've seen spends the whole first chapter being like, this is what the definition of the word phonetics is. This is what the definition of the word phonology is. And it's like, that's not the interesting part. Like knowing the definition of the words isn't necessarily going to, help you get the field of study. It's more just once you get into it, I think it definitely is it's pretty interesting, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. I mean, it's like they over-explain, but it's for a good reason, I guess, if that makes sense. So, which I'm not one to speak on it because I didn't study it, but it's definitely an interesting topic. And I know a ton of people that have done linguistics, and it seems like they've taken a lot out of it to be able to enhance their studies. One thing I do want to ask, well, there's a lot of things I want to ask, but like, and again, sorry, I don't have, no
problem.
It's going to be out of left field sometimes, just because my brain is just like hyperactive. But in terms of your study, because I know that you teach, or and
I was when the schools were open, but they're not open anymore.
Yeah, no, I understand. You're from Canada, right? You're from you're near like the Toronto area?
Yeah, so I grew up kind of like in a satellite city of Toronto.
Here's an interesting fun fact. The last 3 championships that Toronto has won, the very next year something tragic has happened and that season has not finished. So in 1918 Toronto won what is now the Stanley Cup in hockey. 1919 there was no finals. The Stanley Cup was canceled because of the Spanish flu. In 1992 or 93, Toronto won the World Series. The next year there was no World Series. They canceled it because of a player strike. And then last year the Raptors won the NBA championship. And this year we're not sure if we're going to get one because of the coronavirus outbreak. So
well, I guess we just wanted to hold on to it for another year.
That's true. The
Leafs haven't won in my lifetime, so if the Raptors are the ones, we're gonna hold on to it for 2 seasons if we can.
Yeah, that's right, man. That's a good way to look at it. That's I was thinking about that earlier today because I thought you had said that you were from Toronto, and I was like, I'm gonna bring that up because obviously it's purely coincidental, but it's pretty funny to think about. But so you were a teacher and stuff. So in terms of you teaching, because there's a lot of negativity online, and I think a lot of it has to do with a couple of different things. But there's a lot of negativity online in terms of learning languages via a classroom. There's a lot of videos of people where they're like, you can't learn languages in a classroom, which I personally don't agree with. I think that structured lessoning is perfectly fine. But how do you how do you feel about that? Because I mean, that's your job, and like, I'm sure I've seen videos of, and if you teach anything like these structured videos that you make, I can't imagine it not being a fantastic course.
I mean, the way I teach in a classroom is different from the way that I guess I learn, in the sense that like I teach mostly grade 1 to 6 French. So there's a lot of like songs, there's a lot of almost immersive structures. Like we watch a lot of videos, we listen to a lot of audio, and because there is a curriculum there are certain like things that I have to hit. That's just the way it is. So in that sense, I can see where people come from when they say, oh, I don't learn well in a classroom, or you can't learn a language in a classroom. However, I do think that like what a lot of people don't realize is that education, especially in a classroom or in a university, is often reflective of society. So like when you think about schooling, a lot of people want, at least I see in the parents of my students, they want a structured test-based system, which is not necessarily how people learn.
Right.
But I think if you can take the material as a learner and apply it in a way that works for you, at the end of the day, it's information. I learned a lot when I took French and Italian and German in university. I really liked it. Was there a lot of conversation between myself and the other students? Not necessarily, but I learned how to take that information and kind of apply it to my life in different ways. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think
No, it's.
I don't think it's impossible to learn with a classroom, and I do agree with you that I think it gets a bad rep. I think
Yeah.
it definitely, and right now with the internet, and I've said this to other people who I've spoken with, the internet has opened up this world of infinite possibilities.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can take language lessons online, it's like a Greek myth. Like people like 20 years ago couldn't do this. And I've personally worked with a lot of brands like Lingoda, for example, and they do online lessons and they do it super well. And so I would recommend it in that way. I just think really if it works for you, it works for you. And if it doesn't, nobody's judging, right?
And I think that's the biggest thing too, is because you see a lot of the big, and I understand. I think I had this conversation with someone or briefly yesterday on one of these streams. Is that, or maybe the day before, I don't know, but a lot of stuff, especially if you're getting your language information from YouTube, is clickbait. Like you have to be careful. So obviously, what's a better title? I learned a language in school, or schools suck, never go. You know what I mean? Like it's so. I think you have to kind of filter through some of that stuff. And I also think that there's this weird mentality of I did it by myself. I had no help. That's how good I am. Like, and I don't think it's necessarily purposeful as much as like maybe subliminally, like you're, subconsciously you're just like, I did it on my own. I had no help. But like, it's just a weird, I don't know. It's just a weird thing.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think also too, what a lot of people have to realize, and I think I've had to confront this because of what the Polyglot Files has become, which is something that's bigger than myself most days, is that the language learning industry is an industry, whether you want to admit it or not. It's something that's happened, and you can either actively fight against that and miss out on the so many positive things that the language learning industry has, or you can, in a sense, kind of not buy in. Like I'm not saying people need to spend millions of dollars here, but like it's the resources are there and some of them are really good. So I understand that tension, I think.
Yeah, and I know, because everybody's thing is always, well, I can use this app for free or I can do this, but at the same time I'm also a pretty firm believer in you get, now not always, but for the most part you get what you pay for.
Totally.
If I pay $60 for something to use, it's probably going to be a lot more thorough than something that is free, made by a community or whatever. So that's the way that I've always taken to that. Do you use any kind of? You seem like you're pretty like by the books, not by the books like literally, but by the books in terms of like you study like you're in a classroom, like because I saw your Russian video and I know you were taking notes and stuff like that. So do you use a lot of applications, or is it mainly like book and online resources in terms of like videos and stuff like that?
I use a mixture of things. My problem is that like I have sometimes a really small attention span. So like I like to mix it up a lot. Some days I'm really by the book and I'll sit down with a textbook and I'll want to go through a chapter, and then sometimes I'll just max out. Like I've been I don't know if you did Ling Jam this year, but I did Ling Jam a couple days ago, and I did Finnish, and I was using Finnish Pod 101, and I got to the part where they started introducing Finnish cases, and immediately from reading it, I just like shut down and was like, I don't want to do this. I'm not ready for this. So then I changed it up and I went and used Mango Languages, which is a free app that I can access through my library. And I was just kind of doing flashcards. And then I have a textbook. It's not down here with me. Oh, yes, it is. Hold on. I was using this one,
Teachers,
which
okay.
is a book that I found at a used bookstore in Cape Town last week, which is like $2.50, and it's like from the 90s, so it's pretty old, but like this is pretty indicative of what my language learning process looks like. I don't stick to one thing. I kind of believe in like getting a big depth of a lot of different things, and obviously I know you as well. You use Link. Link is something I love. But sometimes I get too overboard with Link, and then I'll change it
Yeah.
up. So I'm
No.
everywhere. I'm all over the map.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Ling Jam because that's something really really cool. I did Ling Jam sometime last year, and it was again 2 or 3 days, and I remember doing Italian. But yeah, what do you think about that? Because I think Ling Jam is a great idea. I think it's good for two reasons, and I think that it's good because it can introduce you to a language that you may not have ever looked at. And if anybody wants any more information, is her website, is it langjam.net?
I think it's languagejam.com. Let me double check here. Languagejam.com. No, that's not it. It's somewhere else.
Language. Okay, we're gonna find this website for you guys. It's a really cool idea though. I think it's good because, yeah, it's not Ling Jam.
Languagejam.net. I just found
Okay,
it.
so it's languagejam.net. Okay, yeah. So definitely go check that out because you basically sign up and it doesn't cost anything, but I guess you choose all these options. Do you want to learn an alphabet similar to yours or not? And then, of course, it basically signs you up for language. I think this is good, like I said, for two reasons. I think, one, it can get you introduced to a language that you may not ever have wanted to study because it's just 2 days. Two, I think this is a good idea because a lot of people don't take breaks in language learning, and I'm not saying that you should, but at the same time, sometimes a couple of days away can make a huge difference in the language you're currently studying.
Oh, I think you definitely should take a break. This is probably not directly related to Language Jam, but yeah, we could come back to that later. I agree with you. I think not only is it good for exposing you to a language that you wouldn't necessarily study on your own, like the last time I did it last year, I got Kurmanji, which is like a northern Kurdish language spoken in like Syria and Iraq. I would never have picked that for myself, but by the end of the Ling Jam challenge, and I had a wedding that weekend, so I didn't really get that much time to work with it. I was like enamored. Like I still think about like I should pick up Kurmanji again.
Yeah.
Like, that was really cool,
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I got Italian, which was really cool. That actually sparked my interest in Italian because I never studied much. I've always thought Italian, I guess Romanian could probably have this claim even more, but I've always thought Italian is kind of like the forgotten Romance language because everybody's like, Spanish and French, that's what we're learning. And then Italian and Romanian are like, hey, we're totally here too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
What all do you speak out of curiosity? I know that your French is like super high level. What else do you speak?
Speak, I guess, like to a conversational, like could hold myself if I needed to. English, obviously, French, Italian, Afrikaans, and German depending on the day. And then I've kind of studied to some extent Danish, Russian, and those are kind of like my top 7. I can understand Dutch just because of the connection with Afrikaans.
Right.
I can understand Spanish just because I seem to have like every language around Spanish. And then I've dabbled in things like Japanese and Korean, but not really to any meaningful extent.
Sure.
So I'd say 5 would be like my top. And then could get by in some other ones if I needed to.
Yeah, that's not. I mean, I think that's a fair assessment. That's a pretty good, and that's super good. Yeah, I do remember you having an interest in Afrikaans. I was trying to study it at the beginning of this year. I go through so many spells of just dabbling because I've never. It's like I can't fully pull the trigger on something, and I wanted to learn Afrikaans because that is a very interesting language to me. Just in terms of it's. I mean, it's. As far as I can understand, it's a new language, right? Like it's kind of a branch from Dutch, maybe, and that interests me. But
yeah, it's honestly it's an amazing language, and it wasn't one that I ever anticipated learning. But then I met somebody, and they spoke Afrikaans, and it kind of just went from there. And I went to South Africa in 2014. I went again in 2016, and after that, I was like, I'm learning this language. It's like super cool. I actually just got back. I was in South Africa for about a month until I had to go home because of the coronavirus. And like being able to use it every day, being surrounded by Afrikaans media. I've got like a pile of books over there that you can't see off camera over there that I just like brought back and like dumped out of my backpack. Yeah, it's a really awesome language. And it kind of has that dual usage where, it's part of this culture in South Africa, but if you understand it, you also can understand Dutch.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that that's the reason why you should learn Afrikaans, but it's definitely a bonus, I would say.
Yeah, I still at some point want to learn it, just because. But I'm trying to get myself to concentrate on one thing, and
Hmm.
I struggle with that. Do you ever have issues with the concentration? Like,
Yes.
like how do you try to get past that?
All the time. It's a daily struggle. That's the one thing that like I don't think I can give anybody advice on because like I cycle through all of my languages and all of my inspirations and all of my motivations like literally all the time. And I know this is I've been part of a bunch of different conversations on Twitter about it that like there's this weird pressure in like the language learning community
Hmm.
to like pick a language and just like get super good like C1 level at it and then like you're done, you've reached like nirvana and you can move on. Like, but that's not, I don't think the way most people learn. That's not how I learn. Yeah, but I definitely can agree. I've
Yeah.
had trouble focusing. So I try and go in spurts, I would say.
Yeah, it's well, and it's tough too. I think the biggest part of the language learning community, and part of the issue is people are expecting something of you, but you don't owe
Mm-hmm.
anybody anything, and for some reason, people think that you do.
Mm-hmm.
If you are happy, I
Yeah.
mean, what really, like my level in Spanish is not great, but I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
I can speak Esperanto to a certain degree. That makes me happy, and I've dabbled in a bunch of other stuff. And when it comes down the line in Japanese, I can say some survival phrases and understand a lot
Mm-hmm.
more than I can speak, and I'm okay with that. So it's like it's a weird thing where people are expecting stuff from you, but why? Like you don't owe anybody anything.
Exactly. Yeah. I kind of experienced that when I started the Russian vlog series.
Mhm.
Like I started at the time of my life when I was going back to school to actually become a teacher, and I thought like this could be a really cool thing that would allow me to not only learn a new language that I'm interested in, but create content for this channel that I'm really enjoying doing.
Mhm.
And then I think by the time I got to like vlog 11 and vlog 12, I had convoluted the whole process of learning to be like, well, I need to keep doing this because people are expecting this of
Mhm.
me, and people have to see that upward progress. But that's not necessarily realistic. I don't think that that's how anybody really learns. And I think once you start adding that pressure, the process becomes unenjoyable, and it's not a process for you anymore. Therefore, I don't think you end up reaching the
Mhm.
goal that you originally had.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I can agree with that. I think part of my problem is, in terms of on YouTube, is I would always start these languages, and I would do like that because my channel isn't language information; it's language journey. Like it's about me
mhm,
studying, but it does put a weird. Even though like I don't get paid, it's not like I'm huge. I mean,
mhm,
I may have 100 viewers on a video on a given day. So I mean, it's that's big for me, but it's not huge.
mhm,
But you have this sense of
mhm.
overwhelmingness because you didn't mean to shrink that screen, because you do feel like you owe somebody something, and so
Yeah.
that's one thing I'm trying to do is step back.
Hmm. And it's further amplified by the fact that there are so many other people also doing so many great things that sometimes it becomes a comparison game between like, oh, well, this person's kind of doing it too. And like, they seem to have so much more fluency or so much more
Right.
experience in this field. And like, why don't I have that? Like, am I missing something? So I think, I don't know, I think it might have been Ophelia Vale. I know you also
Mm-hmm.
follow her on social media,
Mm-hmm.
and she had been talking about this like I don't know if it was her, so I don't want to put words in her mouth,
Mm-hmm.
but somebody on Twitter was in the community was talking about how the community, even though being super positive, was also leading to negative feelings because they were comparing themselves and being compared to
Mm-hmm.
other people who are active in the language learning community. And I think that's something that we as a community need to maybe be cognizant of. Like, I'm not saying we shouldn't celebrate how great we're doing and whatever, but
Yeah.
just show that like it's not always sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes we're tired. Sometimes we don't feel like learning languages. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well, because but that's normal, and that's I talk about this a lot, and that is a lot of there's too much to because you've got people in the language community who watch, like, for example, like me being someone who has studied languages for 11 years, I can watch a video and be like, okay, like I can understand what's happening here or there without having to be explained. But you take some of these channels that are releasing these, I learned X language in a week or 2 weeks, and you read the comments, and people who aren't normal language learners and who maybe just got into it are like, oh, well, I'm not this good, and it's false information, which I think is negative because it's causing people not want to learn it because they don't think they're as talented as you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you're right though. People need breaks. Like, and there's nothing, like, I don't understand why that's such a negative thing. Like, oh man, you stopped doing this. Where's that? You didn't even study it this week.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And like I'm guilty to the point where like I feel bad about it for just like disappearing for months at a time. Just because realistically life happens, and like, the language learning community and YouTube and language learning is a part of my life. But over the years, it's not completely who I am as an identity. So that's not to say that I don't want to do it. I always will be doing it. But I think sometimes not only is it natural, but it's almost healthy to take a little bit of a step back. Because it can be really easy to get wrapped up in a lot of it, especially now it's become commercialized. It's such a commercialized community. It can be a little bit overwhelming and a little bit depressing sometimes.
Yeah.
It's probably not what people want to hear, but it's kind of true.
No, it absolutely is. And that's, the thing I enjoy about, watching and talking to people like you is it's like anybody watching this, like this is two real people. Like you have a normal job. I have a normal job. We're not making money off of the language. Like we're not like, this is not our full...
Sorry, you just fell off the pile of books.
No, you're good. But it's like we're normal people who, like, we're learning a language not as a full-time job. We're doing it because we enjoy it, and so hopefully people can kind of see that in terms of that. So where just out of curiosity, where all of you I know you said obviously South Africa, but how many places? I always feel like such a lame person in this regard because I've literally never left the United States. But where all of you traveled to?
But you have a kid, don't you?
Well, yeah, I do have a 3-year-old.
That's amazing. So. That is an accomplishment in and of yourself. I take my hat off to you. I would love a kid, but like I don't know. I feel like I'm too selfish for children.
It's not, and that's the thing. Like I actually appreciate there. A lot of people have this theory that maybe not a lot of people, but there are people who are like, oh, it's your basically responsibility to procreate and continue on. But like, I think it's way more responsible of a person if you can say, like, I appreciate that more than just being like, well, I'm gonna get this kid and hopefully it'll be all right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But yeah, where all of you have you gone?
Well, I had intended to be traveling long term for a majority of the winter. So I left Toronto back in like December, the end of December. I had fulfilled a contract with a school board here after teaching French for the fall. And then I booked a one-way flight to the Philippines. I was in the Philippines for about a month and then moved to Thailand. And then I was intending on going to Vietnam, but the day before we went to Vietnam, one of the cities that we were going to fly into just entered a quarantine because of the coronavirus. So then we had to go to, well, we didn't have to. We chose to go to South Korea. And then when we arrived in South Korea, 48 hours later, they had that outbreak with, I think it was some sort of church in one of the southern cities. So I was only in Korea for a week, and then we decided just to go to South Africa. And then about a week and a half ago, our prime minister went on television, Justin Trudeau, and he said, all Canadians need to come home because this is getting out of control. So obviously it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to continue to travel until about June, July. But I'm super privileged for the fact that I was able to go as long as I was. I know a lot of people don't get to do that. Right. And it was an amazing experience.
That's cool.
It's great.
So you're almost like a freelance teacher, like.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I try to be.
I didn't know that was a real thing. You can just sign like month contracts, like.
Yeah. Well, I guess here in Canada, because we have like a huge influx of teachers. So I kind of went to Teachers College knowing that, I did have a leg up because I had French, but that I would be able to kind of be a supply teacher and take contracts for a while before I wanted to settle down and kind of do it long term if that's what I decided to do. So when I saw the contract and it was only 3 months and I knew I wanted to go traveling long term anyway, it kind of just worked really nicely. It was perfect.
Yeah. Do you plan on at any point, because it seems like a lot of the divide in language learning in terms of what you learn is you've got people who are like me. I'm like, I want to study Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Chinese. I want to study all those Asian languages. Do you plan on like maybe long-term wise studying any of those?
I do. Yeah, I know that my study has been Eurocentric, but I think it's mostly not because I think European languages are better, just the resources have always been there for
Yeah.
me. It's easier for me to study European languages because like I know Afrikaans speakers, I know Italian speakers.
Mhm.
French is so much a part of my life here in Canada. Um, I dabbled in Japanese last winter, actually probably this time last year because
Mhm.
I had been working with somebody and we were going to do kind of a cool project that ended up falling through. But I studied Japanese for about 3 months. I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit intimidated by kanji and
Mhm.
by the whole, like I know kanji is taken from or Chinese
Chinese.
writing system. So I'm a little bit intimidated by those, but when I went to
Yeah.
Korea for that minute, I studied a little bit of Korean and I was actually pretty interested, and I think maybe in the future I would pick up Korean again. That would
Yeah.
probably be the one I'd go for.
Yeah. Well, the cool thing, like Korean does use, they do have some symbols too, the Hanja, but for the most part,
Mhm.
it's Hangul, so you could get past that. Like,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have to worry about that. And Hangul is, the conversation I had yesterday was talking about how incredibly easy Hangul is to learn. Like,
Yeah.
it's so easy. Like,
Yeah. I was using the Duolingo like the beginning of the course, and the whole first like module was the alphabet, and
alphabet.
I picked it up pretty quickly. I mean, I didn't like to go long term with it, so I don't know if I'd be able to read it now, but it seemed like it was pretty logical.
It's pretty intuitive. I studied it several years ago. I learned specifically. I go through phases where I love to just learn. I don't care if I learn the language. I just want to learn alphabets. Like I love writing systems. Because like right now I can read obviously the English alphabet, but I can read hiragana, katakana, hangul. I can read Cyrillic, and I can read the Greek alphabet. Like, and I
That's
love
cool.
like. I may not know what it says, obviously, but like in terms of like reading the letters and stuff, like and I really like it. But I study Hangul, and I didn't pick up Korean. I just studied it. But 4 or 5 years go by, and then I'm like, all right, I'm gonna jump back into Korean, and I mean, within 10 minutes of just kind of refreshing, it was just back. Like it's,
Yeah.
and the original time I learned it was probably just a couple of hours. Like
Yeah.
it's pretty
Yeah, I
intuitive.
even found that with katakana and hiragana. Hiragana? Am I saying that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
hiragana.
I found the Japanese Pod 101 tutorials on them, and I think one day I put on like one of the half-hour ones that was like, you're gonna learn all of the hiragana in half an hour. And I went for a run, and by the end of that on the treadmill, it was like, okay, this is
Oh.
like I'm picking this up.
Yeah, actually, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. Like the Japanese, they're not the Japanese, but like the Pod 101s are. It's something that I always want to get into, but I feel like unless you kind of know what you're doing, like what is your study pattern with those? Because I feel like I just kind of jump in and then I'm like, what am I doing here?
Yeah. Well, I pay for Afrikaans Pod, and I just got I got a deal for Finnish Pod 101. It was like just a one-off, like month-long subscription because I knew I was doing Ling Jam.
Hmm.
I like that you don't have to think about, what is my next strategic move in a language because they basically create a whole course for you, and it's not necessarily a textbook where like one lesson builds on the other. They're accessible because you can bring them, you can listen to them as you're going for a run. They have a bunch of free content on YouTube. I think what they're doing is good. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, and some people, I think, like we mentioned earlier in the live stream, aren't so okay with paying for language
Right.
resources. But I think if it's something that people are interested in, it's definitely
Yeah.
worth the money. I don't know about the long term necessarily. I haven't used it, for years and years and years, so I don't know where the max is. Like I don't know if there's like a natural end to it, but it works for what I need it for right now.
Yeah. I've dabbled with it, I guess would be the appropriate term. And I do. There are aspects I like of it. I love that when you're going through a lesson. I do like that they have kind of that native dialogue, just little 30, 40-second people speaking. I think that's really cool because I personally, I think that is absolutely critical in learning is hearing native content. But I also love that if there's something you don't know, I love that you can immediately make a flashcard out of it.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to have, multiple programs running or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of really, really cool features of it. I just never,
And
really
the grammatical explanations are really succinct as well.
Mm-hmm.
There have been a couple textbooks that I've been, like my Russian one, I got the new Penguin Russian something or other textbook.
Mm-hmm.
And I think by the end of chapter 3, it was just so dense with grammar information that I just couldn't do it. Whereas with the pod series, it kind of is just, this is the concept, this is your need to know information, you can move on. So it doesn't like bog you down with all the like, well, this is how every single ending looks, and this is like every single exception and situation. It's just very to the point. What do you need to communicate?
Yeah, and that's cool. But I think, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but I do think that in terms of study, I do think you can get to a point to where you're overthinking stuff.
Yeah.
And that in itself makes it harder.
Yeah. Over the years, I've become a little bit of like a grammar phobe. I'm not going to lie. I used to be like, learn the grammar, memorize the grammar.
Mm-hmm.
But like the further I get into learning multiple languages, the more I see like a chapter or a blog post dedicated to like, this is the locative case in whatever language. And I automatically am like, no, I can't do it. Like, I don't want to do it. Just because it can be so dry sometimes, so boring. I don't want to memorize the endings. I just want to know like what's the gist of it here so that if I see it, I can identify it. And if I need to use it, I'm going to use it. You know what I mean?
What do you think about Steve Kaufman's approach in terms of if you like just basically drown yourself in material and that you'll just kind of pick up on the patterns naturally?
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know if the problem is I don't know if I have enough experience to say like, yes, this works 100% of the time. It works for me sometimes, but it part of his, and he says this, part of his method is having a lot of input. With the kind of lifestyle I live, I don't necessarily always have time for a lot of input, so I'll normally just kind of do the workaround and be like, okay, I just want the quick grammatical explanation here. But I love Steve Kaufman's work. He's Canadian, so I'm all about that. He created Link, and I know we've talked about that already.
Yeah.
Link is an amazing system. I would pay $100,000 a year to use it. Like, it's changed the way I learn languages completely. I
agree. And I actually, my favorite thing about it, well, not really my favorite thing. This is a stupid thing to say is my favorite thing, but like, because there's a lot of awesome features. But honestly, like, the number one question that anyone asks whenever you're talking about it is, how many words do you know? And that's what it tracks. Now, obviously, and I gave this example. If you're learning Spanish, like if you're learning comer is to eat. Well, if you learn comer and then como, come, comen, comes, comemos, obviously that's not 6 different words, but you know how to use it 6 different ways now.
Yeah.
So I get that it can kind of inflate the numbers a little bit, but it's still a great, it's still a great thing of being like, well, I know 1,000 words, even if 100 of those words are verbs that I've learned 3 or 4 different tenses, I've still learned 500, 600 words.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, really cool.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people are, whether or not they want to admit it, I think a lot of people use that, maybe not necessarily the word count from Link necessarily, but people use that as an indicator for their own success. I know for me, when I hit 10,000 words in French, and I've been studying French for like 22 years now. When I hit 10,000 words in French and Link, I was like, oh my God, like, look at me. Like, this is great. And for me, I'm the kind of person who gets motivated by that quantification of like, I know 1,000 words in Russian now. I know 500 words in Danish. So a lot of people are like, oh, don't focus on numbers. That's not important. But I think for motivation in the long term, I don't think it hurts. I actually think it might be beneficial. Well,
and to me, because I go back and forth on well, not back and forth. I'm pretty anti, and I have been for a few months. But the idea of streaks, I prefer that number count for my words known, because it's showing me that regardless of if I'm doing, if I have a streak or not, it's showing me I'm being introduced to new words, and it's showing me that it's starting to click.
Yeah.
And that is more beneficial to me than and look, I'm not saying I'm not impressed by these people with 2,000 and 3,000 day Duolingo streaks. That's
Yeah.
whatever, you know. And at the end of the day, whatever works for you, and I am super happy it does. But like, to me, that's more like, if I go, like, for example, this past week I went from 218 known Greek words to 250, but I didn't do it every day either. But that's fine. So instead of having a 4-day streak or a 2-day streak or a 3-day streak, I grew 40 words or 32 words last week. And I think that's a good way to measure.
I agree. Yeah. And I think too, if you look at things like I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this properly, but I'm going to try. The Pareto principle, and they talk about how if you know 80% what is it? The 80-20 rule. If you know the most common 1,000 words in a language, you can understand 80% of that language. If you know the most common 5,000, you can understand, 95% of the language. So for me to see that I understand 1,000 Russian words, therefore I can understand 80% of all spoken and written communication, to me, that's really that's really motivating, and it kind of brings me up on those days when I'm not really feeling like plugging away at growing vocabulary or learning a new grammar structure or whatnot.
No, I 100% agree. It's funny because on this show, like a couple of days ago, I had a guy who he's not a big Link fan, and so he talked about the differences, and now I've got you on here because I do, man. I if I had to get rid of every language software that I use and could only have one, which I actually did just go through a giant exodus on my phone. I deleted any kind of app because I find like, and maybe you have an experience similar to this. I would be interested to hear. I've gotten to the point to where I had a big, just like, conversation with myself, right? Like I had essentially a come to Jesus meeting with myself about languages and stuff. And I said, you know what? I said, I've done the same thing for 11 years. I've barely made improvements in things. I keep jumping around because I can't get to where I can understand stuff. I said, something's got to give. I deleted any kind of language learning app in terms of gamification. I deleted, and I love some of these apps, but I deleted Drops. I deleted Duolingo. I deleted Lingodeer. I deleted all that stuff because any of the time that I spent on those, I'm now going to spend doing some sort of, even if it's watching a TV show with subtitles, to hear the language and just kind of get in it. Like, I feel like I'm wasting my time with that stuff. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but like, I just...
Yeah. I think I resonate with that to an extent. I think the mistake that a lot of people make, and I don't think you're making this mistake, so I just want that to be clear, is that, a lot of these apps, that sounds very like, a lot of these apps. I don't mean it like that,
No.
but like a lot of the programs available in the language learning industry are like, this is the one thing that's going to bring you to like C1 level. You will be able to have the most amazing conversations in a language. And I don't necessarily think it's false advertising because at the end of the day, it's a business, but that's not true. Everybody knows that. Like it's spoken about all over social media. It's spoken about on YouTube by people like you and me. So I think if people are trying to depend on, this one app is going to bring me to where I want to be, it's just not possible. And I think as humans, we're guilty of falling into cycles and falling into patterns. And I even find it myself. Like I right now am on a Duolingo kick because I'm trying to get through all the Duolingo stories in the German stream. Does that necessarily mean that I'm like learning better than I would on Link? Because really Link does everything that Duolingo Stories is doing. No, but arguably maybe I prefer the interface of Duolingo Stories better because it allows me to interact with the story. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but
I do. And one thing that I kind of came to because I was speaking to a friend of mine, my buddy Evan. Anybody who watches is probably tired of me mentioning this guy, but I get a lot of my information from him because he taught English in Korea for 2 years. He's been in Japan for 4 years. He speaks Spanish, French, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, English, obviously. So I get a lot of my, because he's a guy that I know personally. I've known him since middle school. Like, you know what I mean? Like, like I know this guy, and I know that he's not going to lie to me or whatever. But I was talking to him about it, and part of the reason I deleted some of the apps is he said, do whatever obviously do whatever makes you happy. He said, are you trying to speak to people or are you trying to pass a test? And I said, well, I want to speak with people, or, I want to watch TV and understand. And he said, okay, apps are going to help you pass a test.
Yeah.
He said, because if you get something wrong, even if you'd be understood by a native, they're still going to tell you it's wrong. Yeah. Like, and I don't know, like, I don't think he meant it as harsh as he said, but at the same time, I was like, I get that. Because any of these apps, when you look at it, the thing, for example, Lingo Deer, and I love Lingo Deer, and I'm still going to have the code in my description to get the percent, whatever. Like, I don't get kickbacks from that. I literally don't get paid, but I do like it. But, it's, when you learn about it, it's this will get you to JLPT 5, or this will get you to A1 or A2, like, and that's what it always is, and it's about passing those tests versus conversation.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily know if we are going to be able to escape that, because language learning is so tied to traditional education that's what a lot of people know, and that's what a lot of people expect. And frankly, being able to go abroad and be fully immersed in a language and learn in a so-called natural way, even with systems that are really, really good. I'm using Link as only an example, not because I think it's the best, but because I really enjoy it. But even with a system like Link, getting that fully immersive, natural, full language exposure is impossible unless you live in the country where that language is spoken. Even in South Africa, and I was just there last week speaking Afrikaans, not only is South Africa a country with 11 official languages that you're contending with, but automatically going to a country like that, people know that you're an English speaker. And as an English speaker, you have, I don't want to say social clout, but people are like, oh, you're English, like, I'm just going to speak English, so you're fighting against that as well. I don't know where I was going with this, but I think I was trying to say that, apps are only going to be able to do what they can do, and a lot of the default happens to be like, well, this is how you learned in school. You memorize some vocabulary, you put it in some sentences, you got some comprehension, bam, now you can pass the test, know?
Yeah, and that's, well, because I used to have this idea of I wanted to pass these, right? Like, I took a Spanish B1 exam and I passed, and I was like, great. And then what does that mean? Like, and so, there's a video online of, there's a few Korean people who take an English proficiency test and they pass it 100%, nail it, cannot speak a word of English, and then a native English person takes the same test and fails it, but obviously they can speak. So that actually happens a lot here in Canada. I don't want to put my own country on blast, but I am from a primarily English speaking part of the country, so I'm in Ontario. We have French, but it's not necessarily like, you don't go to the grocery store and speak French to anybody. They look at you like you were nuts. Like, it's not part of our everyday life unless you actively seek it out. But some people take French, and myself included, take French for all 12 years of our schooling and get to grade 12, and on paper it says, I took French for 12 years, I'm bilingual, and then you plop them into a French-speaking place and they don't speak French. Right. I was the same way. I finished grade 12, I'm like, yeah, I got this, and then you go to Quebec, go to Paris, nothing. Just whoop, wasn't there. And that's because I think the way that we teach is not the way language is actually spoken. It's not the way that it's actually used. Even, I just wrote I work for Fluent U, which is a language learning app, and I work with their content, their blog content. And I just wrote a post about Quebecois slang. I think I found 45 Quebecois slang words, and I think off the top of my head, I would have only known maybe 5 or 6 of them. Oh. So, and that's not something we're teaching in school. So I guess it's just to say that if we're going to teach the way we continue to teach in classrooms, we're not going to actually learn the way that people actually speak. Right. Yeah. No, and that makes sense. That's Fluent U. I just can't afford to pay the cost that they are. But I do love the idea of that app, of that. I hate to say app, but I love the idea of video, because I like learning with video because you have the visual cues as well. And even in Link, for example, if I'm bringing something in from YouTube, or if I'm bringing in whatever I'm doing, I will I will watch the video first with the subtitles, and then I'll refresh the subtitles with link or whatever. But I love having those audio cues. Mm-hmm. I think that's huge.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, I don't know, a lot of the apps we've mentioned, and I don't know if I can speak on your behalf, but a lot of the apps I've mentioned, at least, like, some of them do have paid subscription fees, but that's not to say that, like, the only thing worth using has a paid fee. Like, I think, yes, I've paid money to learn languages through different programs, but I wouldn't say that I've necessarily stuck with those programs for, like, years and years and years. Sometimes I'll pay for one for a couple months and say, you know what, this has served a purpose, I'm going to try something else. So I don't necessarily think that, maybe you could substantiate this, I don't think it's expensive either to access really good language learning programs. Link, like, I just put my Link account on vacation because I knew I wasn't going to be using it for 6 months.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, well, when you think about for example, there's a guy that I work with who has wanted to learn Japanese for a long time. And again, I'm not a good Japanese speaker, but I definitely know more than him because he's literally never studied. You know what? I know more by total situational, just because I have dabbled in it, or maybe more than dabble. But he was like, I need to learn it, so what can I do? Blah blah blah. And I was like, well, because one thing I will say, if you're getting into language learning, I find applications to be perfect. I just think once you get past the stage of where you have the basics, you need to we got to figure something out. But I was like, try out Lingo Deer, and he was like, okay, and he was like, man, it's $60, and I said, for a year, and he was like, yeah, he was like, man, that's a lot, and I said, I know you're a big video game fan, right? And he said, yeah, and I said, didn't you just get X game and X game? And he said, yeah, and I said, that was $120. And that is going to last you for a month. So, I think I think a lot of it comes to do with it seems like a lot because a lot of them are upfront in terms of a year, but it's $60, for example, for Lingo Deer, or I mean, Link is like $10 or $11 a month, or I think you can do it for a whole month or a whole year for. They'll run sales all the time, like $89.99 or something like that. Like,
yeah.
And it's like.
Yeah, I feel like the guy from that Sarah McLachlan commercial where, like, for $1 a day, you can feed a child in Africa. Like, if you're buying, and I'm guilty of this, if you're buying coffee every single day, you could splurge. I'm not saying on everything, but on one or two apps, programs, whatever that you think are worthwhile. Because I think if you're serious about this, if you're serious about learning languages, and I mean, don't take it from me. Like, I just look at my YouTube content. It's inconsistent as heck. But if you're serious about this, it's something you're going to want to invest in because you're investing in yourself, right?
Yep. And I think people forget that this isn't something that's going to be done. Like, realistically, you're always going to be studying that language, right? You said you've been studying French for 22 years. And just to give even further examples, I know Moses McCormick, he's been studying Chinese for I think 18 years. Matt versus Japan's been studying Japanese for 10 plus years. It's not something that you just learn and stop. Like, and I think that might seem a little overwhelming, but I mean, it's totally worth it, and it's worth the investment that you make in it just for what you get out of it.
Exactly. None of this is sponsored, by the way. I just want to make that clear to anybody who's watching. It's just, I guess it's just a personal opinion.
No, I agree. And I always feel like such a Link shill, man. But I'm always like, this is the greatest thing. Well, all right, so I will be a non-shill for a second. I find Japanese and Korean and Chinese, anything that doesn't have a Latin-based alphabet, not Russian. Russian's fine. Greek is fine. Any of those languages. But Japanese, Korean, stuff like that, I find them to be... I can make them work, but I find them to be nauseating on Link because the words split in weird spots sometimes.
Yeah. I do remember that. When I was trying to learn Japanese, I pulled it up on Link, and I don't think I used it for very long. Probably because of that. Probably because I was having trouble with the splicing of the characters, potentially.
And I think once you would get... Like, I think those are some of the languages that once you get a base in, you could go back, because then you're just more so, instead of reading character by character, you're almost at that what they call +1 sentences, where you understand most of it, and then this one word you need to look up, and that's fine. And so you're almost more so getting the sentence instead of each word by word. But yeah, some of the character splits on it are, they'll have like I don't know, man. It'll just be like in weird, like if you're saying, like if you were saying, I am Jonathan, and you would say Jonathan des, it would be like de and s would be split, and it's one word. And it's like, what in the world?
Yeah, I think too, because the industry has been so focused on European languages that I don't know if I haven't used Lingo Deer, so I can't speak to that. But I'm not sure that the apps are good with teaching other alphabets just yet. Like I know when I was trying to learn Hangul for Korean on Duolingo, they were transcribing it into English sounds, but they weren't using the International Phonetic Alphabet, which I understand why, not everybody knows it. But their transcriptions were weird, and I was having trouble, like, when they would ask you, like, match the letter to the English sound. It wasn't representative of what I thought the English sound actually was.
Yeah.
So it just, I guess I don't know, I'm not a business plan. But if I were going to, you would have to change the angle from which you're coming to teach the languages. You know what I mean? It comes from a very European Latin alphabet background.
Well, I think the biggest issue, if you're going to use an alphabet, it has to be the phonetic alphabet, because that's the only one that's tried and true. People interpret sounds differently.
Yeah, exactly.
So if I hear is that O? Is that EO? Is that AO? Is that OH? How do you interpret that? So I think a lot of what they could do in terms of, especially learning Hangul or like hiragana and katakana, is flash the character on the screen, make the sound, because it's not like later on in the lessons they give you the transcription. You have to recognize the sounds.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think, and I get you're attaching kind of a meaning to that.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah. I'm sure it probably takes these companies, a long time to come up with a system that works, and it's sometimes patchwork, especially when you're such a big app like Duolingo. You're developing, I don't even know how many languages are right now. They must be at least 50. So I can understand why they would just be like, you know what, this is just the makeshift work, so we can pump you through the alphabet and get you to the actual learning.
Well, here's what's interesting to me is Duolingo is community funded.
Oh.
Yeah. And that's one of I've started getting really irritated with them lately. Again, not to sound like a broken record to anyone who is listening to this, in the future or whatever, if you've listened to multiple podcasts, I think that what they have done for language learning is fantastic. I think that they have introduced language learning to people who never would have learned languages before. And in doing that, they've introduced culture to people, and I'm happy about that. They are the new Rosetta Stone. People who don't learn languages know what Duolingo is. Just like 10 years ago, people who had never even thought of learning a language knew what Rosetta Stone was. And Duolingo has taken over that. I find it to be insanely hypocritical and insanely irresponsible for them to be a multi-million-dollar company. They charge $10 a month for premium membership if you want to do that. And there are courses like Spanish, which is one of the biggest, most known, diverse, and like just everywhere spoken languages in the world. And you have computerized voices. That is absolutely inexcusable. And you have a community doing it that's not making any money off of it. Like they're just. I find that to be. I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like, and especially. And this is what I've said in the past, man. You're a multi-million-dollar company. You don't even have to give people money. I guarantee you, they're in Pittsburgh, which is a humongous city. You could have a flyer that says, hey, come in for 2 hours a day for 2 weeks, record X amount of hours of audio for our course. We'll give you a year of Duolingo Premium for free. People would be lined up out the door to provide voices for it.
Yeah.
Native speakers, of course, and you must be a native speaker, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I didn't know that. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, it's a community created. If you go to, you can actually keep track of it, because I'll go ever so often to see if they're adding anything new. But if you go to incubator.duolingo.com, you can see the community. It's like, oh, hey, my name is Jack, and I'm running the Yiddish Duolingo tree. We're trying to get stuff
Oh,
together. Would you like to be a contributor? Come help out. Like,
wow, that's
yeah,
cool. Yeah, I've heard it. I think I stumbled upon the incubator page, but I wasn't sure that I didn't know that was all community
yeah. Now
based.
this, I mean, some of the earlier courses, like with Spanish and French, was probably done by people who currently work there, like in terms of getting it started. Because I mean, Spanish is huge, French is huge. Who's not going to have those? You know, I mean, like in terms of that, but like. But still, yes, I don't know how French is, but Spanish is still a computer voice. Like, it's still and it's not even like good text to speech.
Yeah. I think the German one I'm using right now, I completed the tree like years ago, but I've been using the Duolingo stories for German. And I guess it could be a computer voice, but I think it might be a good computer voice. I don't know. I haven't had that issue with it. But I do know for other language courses, I don't remember which one I had done, but there was, maybe it was Vietnamese. For Vietnamese, there was no audio, I don't think.
Well,
and that was tricky because Vietnamese has tones,
yeah.
so you should probably have some audio.
Yeah. The stories might be a different, maybe a different thing. I don't know if the stories are the same as just like their actual standard course. Like, so they may have audio like for that. The hilarious thing is, of all the courses that they have audio for, real audio, is Esperanto. Esperanto has real, like, I say native, but native audio.
Yeah.
Sure does.
Wow.
So
I wonder, maybe then, was the Esperanto community like involved in creating that course potentially?
Yeah, the guy, I think it was a woman named Ruth and then Chuck Smith were the two big ones that I know, and I think another dude named Lee did. I was huge into Esperanto for a long time. That's actually where the love of, or not the love of, that's where I learned that I could learn a language. So I know people trash on Esperanto, man, but it's always going to hold a special spot because I never had that confidence. I studied so many things, and until I studied Esperanto, I never fully believed, because I went to, they do a thing called NASC, and I was only there for a day because I had some family stuff come up and I had to leave. But I went there, but from the time I got there, I rode with my buddy Kyle down there, who I met via Esperanto, who lived 45 minutes of me, which was crazy. But I rode with him to North Carolina. From the time we got there, got out, we spoke in nothing but Esperanto. People were speaking to us in Esperanto. And at no point did I didn't have to stop and think and translate. Like, it was the first language that truly showed me you can totally learn a language, dude. So it'll always hold a special spot in my heart. I do have somebody on the side here says, I believe the French voices are not computer, and if I remember, there is also a male and female voice example. The Norwegian tree also has real voices, both male and female. So that's interesting. So I guess they're just like, people are going to learn Spanish. Who gives a crap? Let's not put time and effort into that. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I also see somebody here, Sevlin D, says, how do you feel about learning 9 languages at once? So maybe I'll change the tables. I'll ask you.
How do I feel about it? Well, I don't know. I can't tell if that's a troll comment or someone mocking my constant dabbling. So let's see. We'll say, how do I feel about it? Obviously, I feel good about it because I do it all the time. No, I don't, even studying, to be legitimately honest, and this is where I'm really good at giving advice but not taking my own. I think, even personally, I think studying 2 languages at the same time is dumb. Depending on the level you want to get. Let me rephrase that. I don't think it's dumb. If you can do it, do it. But I think it's so easy to be on one thing and then let's say I'm studying Greek right now, and let's say I'm and studying a little bit of Korean or whatever. And let's say I get really irritated with Korean. Well, instead of going back to it, I can literally just be like, well, screw you, I've got Greek, and go to Greek. And then honestly, since I'm studying Greek and I was studying Korean, well, why not put Afrikaans in there? Well, then I get irritated with Greek because the cases are so stupid. So you know what? Screw Greek. I'm studying Afrikaans. I'll just do that. So then I'm studying Afrikaans, and I'm like, well, I mean, if I'm studying Afrikaans, Dutch is really similar, so why not try to add that? It's just constantly, I feel like it's just, and that's honestly part of what I'm guilty of myself.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from in that angle. Because I definitely think I'm guilty with that to an extent. But I also think that, if you look at language learning from the angle of, you're always kind of learning. Technically, all of us, I think, are learning 9 languages at the same time. Like just this week alone, I was reading out of an Afrikaans newspaper that I got from South Africa, and then I was participating in Ling Jam. And
Right.
learning Finnish, and then I was speaking to somebody in French. And I'm sure in all of those situations, definitely with Finnish, maybe less so with French, but I was coming across words I didn't necessarily know. So like it depends on what you mean by like learning all at the same time. If you're trying to, use your beginner textbook and build a base for 9 languages simultaneously, obviously that's going to be difficult. But I think once you reach a certain level, it should be fairly easy to maintain, maybe.
Yeah.
Depending on what your goals are.
That's a good point. Because I know Spanish, so really, even if I were to go through more of the Duolingo tree, or use Babbel, or use Pimsleur, or watch Spanish movies, like I have enough Spanish vocabulary to where, like the way that I always take that when people speak of that is like from the start, like from scratch. But that, I mean, it makes sense because you're right, and even it goes back to what we were saying earlier, where this isn't something you start and then stop. At no point are you. Well, we'll even say this in English. At no point are you ever going to know everything in English, and you've been speaking English your entire life.
Yeah.
There's words that you come across. I'd never heard of the word pragmatic until I started dating my wife, and I started dating her when I was 22, 3, something like that. Like I'd never heard of it. Like, so you're always going to be learning.
Yeah, definitely.
I still don't even know if I can tell you what the word means. Like it's like I kind of understand. So I mean, so it's a weird thing. So
yeah.
Is there anything anything else that you want to chat or add to the table? Are you good?
Not really. Yeah, no. Okay. This has been a great conversation for sure.
Yeah. Sorry, man. I know I'm all over the place, but it's the way my brain works, and I just feel like it adds a level of. I feel like unstructuredness leads to good things sometimes. So
no, definitely. A lot of breakthroughs, I think, for most people are like completely unplanned and unstructured. So I definitely can jive with that.
Yeah. One more comment. I think it's really easy to forget things from languages in which you are a beginner, so you end up studying for years, but you really don't progress. That rings very, very true, because that's kind of what I do with Japanese. Like, I've started and stopped so many times that I've just not ever made progress in the last like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. That's how I feel with Russian. Russian is kind of like the elephant in the room. I feel like I should like always be studying Russian, and then I just never get to it. And then look, another year has gone by, and I've done like maybe 5 cumulative hours of Russian in a single year.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. Well, I'm gonna wrap that up there. You guys can go check out Michael's channel. I will link that. I've gotten better about linking those in the description box. I'm a really bad YouTuber when it comes to that. So, but I will leave the channel, the Polyglot Files, down below. That is a cool name. Also, we'll end that with that. Where did that name? I mean, it's a super cool, catchy name, but where did you come up with that?
I don't know. When I started this channel, I had just come off of a job that I was working at the University of Toronto. I was kind of like a first-year transition program assistant, and I was in like the marketing stream, so trying to like market our program to prospective students. And I just was like, I want to start this language learning channel, and it's going to be great, but like I really need to catch a name. And I think it took me a couple days, but I remember being in the shower and just being like, Polyglot Files, like that sounds really cool. And I had like this vision of like starting every single video with being like, welcome to the Polyglot Files. Today's video is filed under languages, filed under historical linguistics. And like I never did that, but it was a cool idea.
That would have been, that would have been cool. Yeah, I love that name. I think that's a super awesome name. So
yeah, thanks.
Well, thanks everybody for watching. I appreciate it, and thank you for coming on. Like I said, this has been a huge. I love your content. I know that we speak on Twitter from time to time, and I think I've messaged you on Instagram a time or two. But it's always cool to in person, quote unquote, like finally chat. So
yeah, anytime. And I've been trying to get more content on my channel because I've been a bad YouTube channel. So maybe one of these days we'll have to have a live stream on my channel as well.
Yeah, I'm always down for that. So
excellent.
Well, I'm going to end the stream here. Thanks everybody for watching, and I think I'll be back tomorrow night. So hopefully you guys aren't getting tired of these streams. So